This is Talking Albums, a SURKEUS podcast series. I'm John McDonald. Will Chernoff is a Canadian jazz bassist. His latest album with his trio is titled Maybe Eventually. Will, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
Before we talk about your new album, tell me about rhythm changes and your involvement with jazz in Vancouver.
It's where I grew up. That's the coolest thing about it. And, I haven't been in it continuously. I actually fell out of it for a lot of years and I had to come back. And that's kind of what led up to my first album. But in the middle there, when I hit my early 20s, I really didn't feel like I belonged there anymore. And I felt like I had done some things that weren't so great while I was really young. I didn't know how to get on with people and how to have a good time with the people in that community. So I told myself, oh man, I got to go try and do something else. And at this point, I was already out in the working world trying to make a living in the arts and entertainment world in Vancouver, BC. And I worked for a nonprofit. I started a folk band. I did some of that stuff that was outside of the jazz scene. And then my COVID story was that I had the chance to come back because I had the time to start paying attention to it again. And I did come in and make my first album, Aim to Stay, out of that. But really, Rhythm Changes was how I started participating again. So just kind of an experiment of writing about the Canadian jazz album releases that I was paying attention to and going to shows again and talking to the people who are out there making music right now. And I'm really lucky that that's worked as a way to participate, because now, even though I went out of this community that I came up in as a teenager, I'm able to participate in it again and feel like I belong there now. And I'm just feeling really fortunate about that,
What started you on your jazz journey?
Well, that's a funny one, because I was just talking to a friend earlier today at around lunchtime here, and he was telling me about the lessons that he took as a kid. And a lot of people get in through that, but really as a kid, I did nothing musically. I didn't take any lessons on any instrument really. And I started cold in high school. So I owe it all to my high school band program and to riding the wave with the people I met there. For my whole high school time, I got to feel like there were always people ready to jam with me or to try and talk with one of our band teachers to play local gigs, little things that he would find where they would take us and they would give us opportunities to perform. So lucky to have had a couple of years where I could feel like that, just kind of ride this wave and get into it, because I didn't come into it in my childhood or anything like that. It was very tied to me growing up, because I found it as a teenager as kind of one of my things and was able to ride that into my 20s and kind of find my own way in it on this adventure. I played a couple different instruments in band, but then bass kind of became an instrument where there was a spot for me to participate at the school in the music program. And then therefore with my peers who I was able to try and play little things with. And so I got my performance experience on the bass, and I kept going as a bass player through into the band that I started. And then as a recording artist, now I'm playing bass. My first album was with a quartet. This album, Maybe Eventually, is my second album, and it has a trio. I'm playing bass. So that's the instrument that gave me all these opportunities professionally and kind of allowed me to participate as a musician.
You said that inspirations for the new album include ECM Records, Fusion, and Bill Frisell.
Yeah, totally. Bill Frisell, there's one story in particular that really set me in motion, because I went to Capilano University's jazz program here in the Metro Vancouver, BC area, and I got some important learning out of my time there. One of the things that I got to do while I was there was participate in a masterclass when Bill came to the school. And so the small ensembles in the school got to perform some of Bill's compositions for Bill in a room with a bunch of students in it. Like different student bands would get up and each band would play one or two of Bill's tunes, and then they would chat for a little bit and come back. And I got to do that when I was 19 years old. It made a huge impact on me. And then as part of Bill's visit to the university, that night he played a feature concert as part of this engagement at the theater at Capilano University with musician Brad Turner, who is a notable jazz musician in Canada who is on faculty at Capilano University. And Brad Turner was also one of my heroes. He was probably my biggest local artist inspiration. And that's why on my first album, I chose a quartet of trumpet, piano, upright bass, and drums, because that's the exact same group that he had with the Brad Turner Quartet in Canada for decades. Trumpet, piano, upright bass, and drums. And so I really kind of borrowed that kind of feeling. And then I got to hear Brad play with Bill in an ensemble that was basically Bill Frisell's trio plus Brad Turner. And that concert just totally unlocked me as an artist. I wrote all the music for my first album within a week or two of attending that concert. And I haven't heard Bill Frizzell live in person since, but I may yet. There's still time. He's definitely still out there in the world. So I hope that one day I get to hear him again live. And I love so many of his records.
I can definitely feel Frisell on the piece 154.
Yeah, there's a crossing over. I think on that track in particular, I feel like the album kind of moves from swing into something else, because I love to swing and I'm more of a straight ahead jazz person if I had to sit on one side of the fence, because in my community here in Vancouver, there's a very healthy and robust and active creative improvisation and you could say free jazz scene. And there's people here who know a tremendous amount about free jazz, and I really don't. And I'm very aware of that when I'm trying to do what I do at Rhythm Changes in conjunction with them. And I appreciate their patience with me in a lot of ways. But I mean, we're all having fun, so it's all good. But all that to say, I love to swing. And I feel like when you hit that track in the album, like it's like, okay, now the swing side A is kind of done, and now we're kind of going to the side B where it's a little bit more open, and I kind of go into that Bill Frisell bag a little bit more.
Do you have a particular composing process?
Yeah, that's a good question, because everybody's process would be pretty different. For me, I almost always compose in my head. It's usually when I'm walking from place to place. I'll come up with that tune. Then at some point I'll have to sit down and put it into music notation on my computer, and then I'll play it. Like it'll go for quite some time before I ever touch an instrument and try and play the composition, or maybe I'll never play it until I print it on a page and I bring it to Francis Henson, my guitarist in this trio, or Carson Tworow, my drummer. It's a lot of writing in my head, and it's a lot of writing while walking in particular. And I really enjoy the feeling of just improvising or singing something, whether it's something you're making up or whether it's something that's stuck in your head while you're walking kind of against the rhythm. Like, it's just something I naturally do all the time. So it really just comes out of that almost all the time. And the only times when it wouldn't would be if I'm on like a mission to really kind of develop something that comes out of practicing, or that just comes out of me messing around on my instrument. I think some people write like that a lot. Like that's a high percentage of what they write. But for me, it's not. For me, that's maybe a rare little thing. And most of the time it's just kind of writing in my head as I go about my day.
Do you feel a musical growth since your album Aim to Stay?
For sure. It's kind of contrived too, in a way, because Aim to Stay, I put it out in 2020, my first album, but I recorded it in 2015. So there's like a 6 or 7 year gap, almost, you could say, in terms of, so I'm living a different life. Like I am, now I'm married, I'm sober, I've gone and done different things in my life, right? So it's tremendously different. It makes me feel really grateful that I have the first album that actually chose to make it, to be honest, because otherwise something about that would be lost to the sands of time. But definitely on Maybe Eventually now, it's like, it's a good document of this kind of last 2 year period, which has been a difficult one and an important one for me and for a lot of people. So I'm glad to have that as a document too.
What are your plans over the next little while?
Musically, it's about giving this trio a chance to play, because these are good friends of mine. Carson Tworow in particular has been a friend of mine for about 10 years already now. So it's great to have him. He's played drums on everything I've recorded ever. And then it's great to have Francis playing guitar with us as well. We formed as a trio playing a gig in September 2020. Somebody here in Vancouver who's a well-known local guitarist and recording engineer, great jazz guitarist named Dave Sekula. He booked us at a venue, and he booked us for kind of a live recording sort of thing. And that was the first time we put together this trio. Because to be honest, I couldn't fit my quartet in this space. It was a small room, small restaurant venue. And then that got recorded, and after that we started the sessions for Maybe Eventually. We did 2 different studio sessions, and this trio really hasn't had much other chances to perform, even though Francis and Carson and I have all had to do other performance work on the music side of our careers. I'm really excited to finally put together some chances for us to play as a unit more over the next 6 months. That's an area that's in focus for me, and that'll be so satisfying to get some reps in that sense, because we got some album release related shows here locally in Vancouver, and then it'll be about playing a couple of other places in British Columbia if we can, but just getting it on the stage is going to feel great.
Shall we talk albums?
Yeah, totally.
Now, your go-to album is Crystal Silence from Chick Corea and Gary Burton.
Yeah, I started listening to that record. I have the LP. It's at my dad's place. My dad lives on Galliano Island in British Columbia, and I've spun that LP a whole bunch of times at his place. Starting around 2014 or 2015, I think I bought it kind of in my years after I left CAF and started working for a nonprofit, and was still kind of halfway plugged into the jazz community before I departed. And it felt so playful and fun for me. I've always been a big fan of Chick Corea, and I saw Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock play duo piano at a great venue called the Chan Center at the University of British Columbia out here in March 2015. And that was like, it was a really special moment. I'd been following Chick's records while I had been learning about jazz, and to see him in that context was really cool. I had actually, when I was in high school, the same band teacher we had who kept finding all these little local gigs for us to try cutting our teeth when we were teenagers who wanted to play jazz. He would actually sometimes drive us down to Jazz Alley, a venue in Seattle, Washington, across the U.S. border, where they would have kind of marquee jazz artists, the kind where they're not going to come to Vancouver unless it's the jazz festival or a very, very special occasion. And we got to see a trio that consisted of Chick Corea, Stanley Clark on upright bass, and Jack DeJohnette on drums. And Jack was billed as the leader. It was like the Jack DeJohnette trio. And Jack had this album out called Sound Travels, I think, or something like that. Don't have that off the top of my head, but that was in like May 2012. And so I was amazed by hearing Chick Corea in person in that context, and it was a few years out from that. So I picked up this record, and I was amazed at how playful it was. It was a duo album. A lot of my first gigs in real life were duo. I played with my friend, this guitarist, Madeline Elkins, locally, and I wouldn't be performing without her, and with the experiences that I got to have early on, playing little duo gigs together and playing jazz standards. She would sing and play guitar. I would play upright bass. So to hear this kind of duo record with Gary Burton and Chick Corea, it was really special. And like the tune title, What Game Shall We Play Today? I just thought that's such a fun title. That's such a fun attitude that you want to have in life, right? And like Falling Grace, their version of that tune, which I think was written by Steve Swallow, a bass player. They play it very fast, kind of all the way through. They basically hardly even play the melody. It's just like pure improvisation for like 2.5 minutes, and then it just comes to this like beautiful conclusion really abruptly. And so those 2 tracks really grabbed me, I think. Falling Grace in the middle of that album, and then closing with What Game Shall We Play Today? I just thought that's words to live by, you know?
For the album More People Should Hear, you chose What We Leave Behind from the East Pointers.
Oh, this is from the folk side of my life. I started a folk band called Early Spirit, and I was in the band for about 4 or 5 years, up until COVID, with some of my best friends. They certainly became some of my best friends because I spent so much time with them. And when we were recording our first album, splitting the recording sessions actually between here and Chelsea, Quebec. We were up in Chelsea at one of our friends' studios on his property, basically, recording the second half of our album, basically. Like, we did half the tracks in Vancouver, and then we did the other half here. And we kind of hung out with friends and family, etc., in that area for a week, and played a little bit while we were getting the album done. And we had our producer there, who is Leonard Podolak, who's from Winnipeg and who's involved with the Winnipeg Folk Festival and a nonprofit called Home Roots that presents a lot of folk concerts in people's homes around the country. And, you know, we're trying to get inspired. We're trying to find that sound of our album. And East Pointers, it's not quite what my band sounded like, but man, when Leonard suggested that we listen to them, and I hadn't heard of the band yet, This is in the summer of 2018. So this record, What We Leave Behind, was kind of their record. They were in the cycle of it. And there was a single called 2 Weeks. And when I heard that in the car for the first time, as we were going from place to place and we were putting it on, I was like, wow, you can make like, because we were playing like folk music that was influenced by fiddling and like different fiddle tune cultures, like Irish and Scottish music and Quebecois fiddling even too, because we had francophone element in the band. There's so many styles of Canadian fiddling, but like the East Pointers are from Prince Edward Island. They play a certain style of fiddling, and it's like, wow, you can be a folk band and you can have like fiddle music in your band and you can sing like a pop, you know, it can sound like a pop record. You can have like this kind of production that is appealing to like all kinds of music fans, not just people who you would imagine would be sitting at a folk festival in the afternoon. So that song really floored me with like how poppy in a good way it was. 2 Weeks. And then there's like other tracks on the album that are more folky, like there's like an instrumental tune, Tanglewood, that kind of opens it up. And then there's other instrumental set tracks. There's tracks that aren't songs. They're just instrumental sets of fiddle tunes. But then there are other like poppy songs on it. And rest in peace to Cody Chasen, one of the band members of the East Pointers who played on this album. He's since passed, and the East Pointers are continuing. And they put out an album very, very recently, a new record this fall. I heard the original trio lineup with Tim Chasen, Cody Chasen, and Jake Sharon. I heard them in Vancouver at the Fox Cabaret, I think in 2019, when they put out the album after What We Leave Behind. It was called Yours to Break. And that's a good album too, but this one, What We Leave Behind, is super special to me because of how it ties into my band story and how I felt when I first heard that track. It was very inspiring.
Now, for an album that stands the test of time, Saxophone Colossus, Sonny Rollins.
Oh, yeah. I mean, starting out high school, learning to play jazz, like that was just one of the first albums I heard. I think my dad showed me that album, and it was pretty much the first jazz album I can ever remember listening to. So like St. Thomas, the first track, that was like my introduction to jazz, period. So that album is still super special to me. I still go back to it. I think of it as a Blue Note record, but that's wrong. It's on Prestige Records, but you know, it's a classic. It's a stone cold classic for sure. Is what I mean for sure. And now I appreciate kind of all the tracks equally, but I remember especially St. Thomas, just being really special to me. And like the drumming by Max Roach, the bass sound by Doug Watkins, and the piano playing of Tommy Flanagan, like everybody in addition to Sonny on that album. It's just super, super special. And I can't imagine having a better introduction to jazz, to be honest. I'm happy that it was that one. There'd be a lot of great ones, but that's a pretty good start. I definitely love Sonny Rollins, huge fan. I remember in particular, like there's this well-known track that he does with Dizzy Gillespie and with another saxophonist, Sonny Stitt, and they do On the Sunny Side of the Street. And I think the album's called Sunny Side Up, and because there's two Sonnies and they're playing that sunny side of the street. And you get to hear Sonny Rollins and Sonny Stitt play solos. They both play tenor saxophone solos on the same track. So it's like a really nice contrast between, I think Sonny Stitt plays first and Sonny Rollins plays after Dizzy plays. Like he plays his trumpet solo in the middle of the two of them. And, you know, to me as a kid, I guess like Sonny Stitt kind of sounded very textbook on that track. And Sonny Rollins sounded really fresh and creative and a little bit more clever at that particular moment. I mean, Sonny Stitt is a legend. And I'm sure a lot of people would prefer his solo on that track too. Who knows? But for me, it was like a good example of how Sonny Rollins is just on another level in terms of how creative he can be, and still alive today, not performing anymore, unfortunately. But yeah, stone cold classic. What else do you say?
Well, that ends your choices. I gave you an album to listen to. I chose Jazz Suite, inspired by Dylan Thomas's Under Milk Wood, from Stan Tracy. Now, for a while, Stan was the house pianist at Ronnie Scott's jazz club in London, so he played with everyone, including Sonny Rollins. This album has been cited as being one of the best jazz recordings made in the UK. So with all that said, what did you think of the album?
Yeah, thank you for the choice, because I hadn't checked that out before, so I appreciate you getting me hip to that, because that's definitely one I should have known about. You know, I thought about Thelonious Monk, and I thought about Duke Ellington. And those are two composers where I feel like maybe more so than any other jazz artists that I can think of right now. There might be other people who are like this too, but they have their own practice. They have their own like common style. Like you play a Monk tune, you should play it like as close to Monk as you can, right? Like there's just value to be mined there in terms of getting into that feeling that he provided as a composer and musician. And I think Duke Ellington, the same too. Like there's a Duke Ellington feeling, and when you play the repertoire of Duke Ellington, it's like a thing, just like the repertoire of Monk is a thing. And so when I listened to this album, I got like this kind of cross of the feeling of Thelonious Monk and the feeling of Duke Ellington, because there's tracks like there's this one track called No Good Boyo, and that's really like a Thelonious Monk quartet sound to me, that track. And then you get to like the title track, the Under Milkwood track, and it's like this ballad that is super Duke Ellington, what I'm hearing, because it's very kind of sentimental and sweet and tender. But then you have other tracks where it sounds like Charlie Rouse on saxophone playing with Thelonious Monk. So it's kind of an interesting capture of both of these moods that I've identified in my listening, even though there's still so much I don't know. That's what I got out of it. I really like the last track, the blues, the AM Mayhem. I really enjoyed that track. I just thought that had a really nice, fun feeling, and you got those kind of crunchy piano chords, and those particular kind of crunchy chords are very much like their Monk plus Duke feeling to me. Like it's both of those styles are right in there on the kind of piano playing on that track. And there's like in general, the sound of the record, like it has real reverb, you know, like I got a submission this week at Rhythm Changes, and there's no way that anybody would be able to identify what this is, because I don't think it's something that I'm going to be able to publish, but because I don't have space, I heard about it too late. But this album, like the reverb on the album just doesn't sound real. Like it sounds like it was added in post, and it just doesn't sound right. But when I'm listening to this album, Under Milkwood, this Jazz Suite project, like the amount of reverb that is on this record just sounds perfect. It sounds right, you know, like there's no other way to put it.
Well, I'm pleased that you liked it.
Yeah, I'm going to keep listening to it.
Great. Thank you again for joining me, Will.
Thanks, John, and thanks for having me.
Keep well. Bye.